Hi, everybody. I'm just getting ready to get started. So I'm just grabbing some very quick water and then I'll be with you in just a couple of seconds. But welcome to the session so far, and I'll be just right back. Okay, and I believe that you should be able to see me and hear me now, hopefully. If somebody could just check and confirm that for me, that would be fabulous. And oh, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for letting me know. All is working well. Hi, Steve. Welcome, Patty. How are you doing, Nathalie? Hi, Asrith. Lovely to see you all. Welcome, Raisa. I'm very good. Thank you. How are you both doing? Hope everybody's doing really good. And I literally couldn't find my mug and I had it right next to me. Anyway, hope that you're all doing great. Happy Monday. I hope June is treating you well. I hope the summer has arrived wherever you may be, if you are supposed to be in warm season. In the UK, we're still trying to decide if it's summer, spring, autumn, or winter. So, join the club, essentially. Although I guess, we still have a couple of days until proper midsummer. Right, let me just adjust my camera. It's just bubbling a little bit at me, so that's better. Excellent. Hi, Helen. Welcome, Mary. Hope you're all doing good. Thank you so much, guys. And yes, this is being recorded for our audience on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, hi. Thank you so much for joining us from home. Welcome, Linda. Hope that you're doing good. Hi, Marty. Quite warm in Nashville. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, it's not, to be fair, the temperature here today is not bad, but I'm still wearing long sleeves and black. So, that's all you need. That's all you need to know. We have a cold front coming in apparently into the UK this weekend. So it's just one of those. Hi from Florida. Welcome, Mary Jean. Thank you so much for joining us. I've resorted back to wearing hoodies. I know, Steve. Same. I was wearing my summer pajamas and had to throw the dressing gown on the other night. It's kind of crazy. So, But if you guys are looking to visit, it's the perfect time of the year because we don't know if our summer is going to be really awful or really warm. So, come to the UK now in June. That's all I'm saying. It's cold here in Ohio. Well, there you go. I think it's been one of those ones. Oh, I'm sorry if the quiz was too tough, Asrith. I thought I had made it very easy, but my bad if it wasn't so easy. Welcome, Pamela. Hope you're doing good in Tampa. Hopefully staying dry and warm. Hi, everybody that's just joining into the session. Thank you so much for coming through. We are going to be getting started in literally 2 minutes and a half. That's how long we have left until we launch properly with our new Academy of the Baroque Masters, going back to some art history again and with some artists that we haven't, explored just yet. So hopefully this will be of interest to all of you. And for those of you who are just arriving into the session, you're very welcome to use the chat. It's going to be open for the next 2 minutes and a half until we start the tour properly speaking. So, feel free to let us know how you're doing, where you're joining us from. If you are a Baroque enthusiast like me, or if you have a particular, I guess, affiliation to our artist of the day today, which is Rubens, I would love to hear all about it. Warm and pleasant in Memphis. Lovely. Hi, Margaret. Oh, it's been sunny in Wirral. Well, I'm glad about that. Oh, no worries. And the quiz. So Pamela, I believe Asrith is referring to the quiz of the previous academy that we finished literally a week and a half ago. So it may be that. But in any case, at the end of every academy, there is a quiz that you can complete if you wanted to receive a little title. But that is not issued out until the end of the academy. So until week 4. Hi, Tom. Welcome from cool and cloudy Vancouver. Okay, so Canada and the UK strong with the cold weather as usual. Hey, Paige. Welcome back, Betty. Hope you're doing good. Hello, Martina from Zagreb. It's very warm over there. I'm aware our colleague Leah has been enjoying already a very, very warm season. If you haven't met Leah, by the way, I really recommend you have a look at our new guides that have just enrolled with World Virtual Tours into the website. It's really exciting times for us. So thank you everybody for supporting all of these new people that are joining in. I hope France is treating you well, Mary Jean. I hear that there is going to be very sudden elections. Everybody's having elections this year. It's one of those years, 2024. Remember to go and vote, folks, wherever you are. It's important to exercise your democratic rights. And well, we are about to get started in about 30 seconds. So just making sure that everything is running all good on my end of things. Let me just check that, and then we can get started in a second. And for everybody that's just arriving to the session, we are just about to get started, but thank you so much for joining us in here today with this new art history session on the Baroque and Rubens. And I'm about to close the chat, actually, since we need to get rolling, because as usual, I have been quite ambitious with how much I wanted to cover in here today. So we need to roll. So as of right now, the chat is closed, but we will be opening the chat, of course, once again at the end of the talk. So any questions, make sure to, keep them for the end. And a very quick introduction before we get started. So hello, everybody. Welcome to another academy, another session here in World Virtual Tours. In case you don't know me, my name is Dr. Lilian Céspedes González, and it is doctor because I have a PhD from the University of Winchester in history. Art history has been one of my passions pretty much since I was in college, in Spanish college, of course. So, it's one of those. And since our last few art history sessions have been really popular, you guys really asked me a long time ago. I said I would deliver stuff about Rubens. So it was partially your requests that inspired this academy here today. So remember that today is session 1 on Rubens. The next week we're doing Bernini. Then the third week we're doing Velazquez, of course. And on the fourth week we will be doing a contextual lecture to see what other artists of the Baroque were doing at the same time. And well, as I am about to just get started with the PowerPoint presentation, I will also put in the chat just now the links to the ways you can support everything that we do here through the academy or through any of the sessions and tours that we do through World Virtual Tours. Everything is always possible through your donations via PayPal and Stripe. The links are in there, and you also have the links for the upcoming tours and talks for me for the rest of the month. And now, without any further ado, let me indeed start sharing this PowerPoint, and let me just grab one last sip of water because, like I said, I have many things to say today. So let's get started. Excellent. So, like I said, today we start with our Baroque masters. We start with Rubens because Rubens, as you're going to see, is really a genius in his own right, and he's going to be incredibly influential for everybody that comes after him. So, as you know, we need to know the artist before we know the art, because otherwise things don't necessarily make often a lot of sense. But Rubens has a very interesting life, actually. Not always easy, but definitely interesting. So Rubens is actually born in Siegen in Germany on the 28th of June, 1577. And this is quite peculiar because, as you may recognize, he's Dutch. His family was Dutch. His parents were actually from the Netherlands, but they actually had to flee because of the purges of Calvinists that were taking place at the time in there due to the persecution by the Duke of Alba on behalf of Spain, as some of you may recall from the Golden Age sessions. So that's how they end up going to Germany. Now, here is where things get tricky, folks, because Rubens' father was actually the legal advisor and lover of Anna of Saxony, the wife of William I of Orange. And essentially, this affair that he's going to have with Anna is not really going to go down well, as I'm sure you can expect. So Rubens' mom and dad are going to split up. And after a couple of years from when his father dies, still in Siegen, his mother decides that they need to go back to the Netherlands and takes Rubens with her to Antwerp, where they're going to develop their new life and their new, the new family. But it is actually going to be back in Antwerp, where he's going to be raised as a Catholic. Even though previously the family had been Calvinist, they kind of adapt to the social and political tensions of the area. And this is actually something that's going to really go in many ways in favor of Rubens, because as you're going to see hopefully through this presentation today, the importance of religion is very present in his paintings, and he really is going to be the champion of the Counter-Reformation on behalf of the Habsburgs. So this is really going to inform his work. Now, he will start his career as an artist relatively young, at the age of 14, and he's going to have many masters. This is quite common in the Netherlands. Some of you that have done the master class with Rembrandt with me may recall this was also something Rembrandt did. And the vast majority of his formative years, he's going to spend them essentially copying great works of art from previous masters, mostly from the Renaissance and the transition period, but also from antiquity. And this is how he starts shaping himself as an artist in his own right. Now, we know he graduates from school because he enrolls properly in the Guild of St. Luke under his own sole name as an artist in 1598. This is something artists had to do to essentially pay their taxes to legitimize that they were, artists. And from this moment on, he starts working on his own. And well, life is going to be very interesting for Rubens from this moment on, because he really comes into his own ability. In many ways, we often say that Rubens is the synthesis of all of the great artists that came before him, because he literally, drew inspiration from Caravaggio, from Michelangelo, particularly from Tiziano as well. So all of that is going to inform the base of his art to then elevate it in his own way. And because of that as well, we often say that Rubens is a bit of an intimidating artist for those that come after him, because this man, in what is going to be a relatively long life, since he dies in 1640, so the best part of 70 years, it's actually quite incredible, because Rubens is going to be super vibrant, super, I guess, with a lot of vitality in him, and super productive. It was always constantly doing stuff. He pretty much is creating art up until a couple of months before his death. And it's not just the art that he's creating himself. He's going to be running a lot of businesses, because he's not just an artist. He's also going to be a diplomat. He's going to have studios and businesses that he's going to invest in and he's going to manage. So there are many plates that he's spinning all across, the world, and of course, the Netherlands. And as a result, he really sets the bar really high up for those that come after him. But let's start engaging, now that you know a bit more about him, with the grandiloquent Baroque of Rubens, as we often call it, which is characterized by a real sense of eloquence, but also sensualism. And before I turn the page, I need to show a disclaimer, guys, because I cannot really censor what Rubens painted. And you may know he's the master of nudes. So there is going to be a lot of naked people hanging around the screen right now in the next few minutes. So if you have any minors or anyone who's sensitive to these things, you've been warned. Well, we start actually with one of the earliest paintings that we think we have of Rubens after he becomes his own artist. This is actually in his house museum of Rubenhuis in Antwerp. And it's actually a very interesting painting because, well, the topic is, of course, Adam and Eve, the fall of man, from the Garden of Eden. And it's actually interesting because we see a lot of influence in here from one of his masters. Out of the many he had, Otto van Veen is going to be one of the later ones, perhaps one of the ones that had a bit more of an impression on him. And we can tell that the impact of his master is very clearly here, because I'm sure you can see beyond the figures, the general sense of this painting is a very sort of cold hues atmosphere instead of warmth, which we often associate with Rubens. So we know that the abundance of blues and greens in here come directly from his master. Now, as you see, this is a very skillful depiction of Adam and Eve already, from a very young age. It's very impressive the way he captivates the landscape. And although static, the precision with which he depicts these figures, but something really piques our, brains in here, because we notice that he makes a very muscular looking Adam, and yet Eve doesn't look like something most people would associate with Rubens, of course, perhaps because He's just coming into the proper mastery of doing nudes. Maybe this is why we see an idealized Eve rather than some of the later ladies that we're gonna see in a few moments. So this is kind of, so you can see from where we depart to what we're gonna get. It's gonna really be turned to 11 in a few moments. But the other thing that we know about this painting is that actually the figures themselves, Rubens pretty much copies them or takes inspiration from a print by Marcantonio Raimondi after Raphael himself. So Marcantonio Raimondi is well known for creating a lot of prints, when one of which will inspire this comes actually from Raphael in the 16th century. And we know that actually printmaking is really going to be very important for the development of Rubens as an artist, both in his career as an artist himself, but in the development of his businesses. Printmaking in the Netherlands is going to be crucial. So we see that he's using all of the right references at this moment in time at a very young age still. Well, let's get things rolling with more Rubens. Now, for the sake of being fair and square, I've tried to actually given us perhaps a variety of paintings, right, guys? Because, Rubens paints too much. He paints a lot of stuff. And I think some people often just associate him with certain topics. So I really wanted to give you that diversity. And something that is really important in his career is religious paintings because of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. So this is a not always very well known and yet spectacular oil on slate that he does for the Madonna della Vallicella in Rome. He spends a couple of years actually creating art over there, and you can still find it there. Now, interestingly, this commission is actually a two-part commission. He had done a painting in canvas, an oil on canvas, which is what you see on the left. So that was the original idea that Rubens had to create this adoration of the Virgin and the Child with St. Gregory, which of course is the saint that you see featuring prominently in the center on the left, as well as some other local saints. But when he actually finishes making this painting, the man is not happy because of the way where the altar is located and the illumination in this church. The lighting in the canvas just made it look all wrong. And he decides, this will not do. So he starts again. And he decides to change the format. And instead of using an oil on canvas, he uses a slab of slate, which is what he creates the second painting that you have here on the other side of the screen, and what is actually known now as the Madonna della Vallicella, and still in the actual church. So as you see, he's a very self-reflective person, and he's able to pick up on where there may be flaws on art, which I think we can agree is pretty spectacular nonetheless. But the purpose of art, particularly from the point of view of religious art, had to be impactful. People needed to be able to engage with religion in this way. The Netherlands at this moment in time is in constant turmoil between reformists and counter-reformists. The message of God had to be clear. And if you're in a church and you cannot see the art, you can't understand the message. Remember, a lot of people are illiterate still at this moment in time. So he takes it upon himself through his professional integrity to deliver a second piece that actually fits and does do the job properly. Well, we know that for this particular second version of the painting, he actually borrows a lot of inspiration from another important piece of art, which is going to be influential throughout Rubens' art, and that is the School of Athens of Raphael. That is why the composition is completely tiered and sort of creates a much longer piece, which actually is, just because it's creating this, play of the eyes in that regards. But as you see, the man was very dutiful to his work, and that's something we cannot ever, question of Rubens. He takes his job very seriously. Well, this is perhaps one of my favorite Rubens paintings. He has many iconic ones, but this one is very important to understand him not just as an artist, but as a human being. Now, this is the famous double portrait of him and his wife, the Honeysuckle Bower, which is now at the Alte Pinakothek in Munich. And this is not just a highlight of how good Rubens even is as a master of portrait, because I'm sure you can see the features on both their faces, bodies, and clothes are magnificent. But the ability that we see a lot of these Baroque masters to captivate life as an event. Well, what happens in here is that in 1609, Rubens marries Isabella Brandt, who's going to be his wife. The age difference is 32 to Rubens to 18 for Isabella. But these kind of things weren't necessarily controversial at the time. They knew each other through family connections. And well, they're actually going to have a very successful marriage of 17 years, 3 kids, until unfortunately, Isabella dies very suddenly in 1625. We think of some illness, probably even bubonic plague, and Rubens is devastated by her death. He leaves himself really, really scarred through this process. Well, after their marriage together, we reckon he must have painted the piece as a commemoration of their marriage, because if you're looking at the iconography, we see that they're holding hands. And this is normally in art a convention to signify that two people are married. And the general depiction that we have in here is the Garden of Love thematic. This was already popular in the Middle Ages. Of course, it continued throughout the Renaissance and the Baroque, and it's essentially the way of describing romantic love of any kind, which is why the honeysuckle is very important, because you may not know this, but through art history, we have often identified the honeysuckle as a symbol of romantic true love. And that's why it helps frame the scene between the two lovers sitting, next to it or underneath it in this context. Well, what is interesting in here as well is that you can see that on the other hand, Rubens is holding a jeweled sword, which actually suggests he is presenting himself as a wealthy gentleman. He's not necessarily telling us he's an artist, and this is partially in reflection to his career success. When they get married, him and Isabella, they also move to an Italian-inspired villa in Antwerp, which is going to become actually the current Rubens museum. And this is not just going to be their home, it's also going to be a huge workshop for his apprentice, assistants, as well as a library and gallery of art, which he collected. So it's really a big investment that we see Rubens doing, and we see that life is going good for him. He's starting to develop his proper, zenith as an artist in many ways. Well, the other thing that is very clear from this painting is Rubens' understanding of color theory is impeccable. Because if you're paying close attention to the hues on his clothes and the gold trim vest that his wife is wearing, that matches the same kind of light that is coming through the honeysuckle, which is trying to evoke a sunset, which of course is even more evocative of this idea of romantic love in here. Well, now that you understand a bit more about Rubens' lives and the important people in it, let's have a look at a painting which I wanted to include because I believe it's pretty well known, but it's also a little bit controversial because it's just had a different reading. So I wanted to be able to give you the alternative reading of this painting. This is, of course, the Four Continents. We know that Rubens painted this between 1612 to 1615. And it's been very recently reevaluated. An art historian called Elizabeth McGrath actually suggested that the idea that we had of this being the four continents personified by women, or at least the four continents that were known back then, of course, Europe, Asia, Africa, and America, this is instead a representation of water nymphs next to four of the most important rivers in life at that moment in time. And the four great rivers come from ancient ideology as well as from Christian exegesis. And these four rivers are supposed to represent the River Nile, the Ganges, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. Or in some other readings, the Tigris and the Euphrates may be exchanged for the Danube in Europe and perhaps for the Rio de la Plata in Argentina. Well, why do we think, or why have they proposed this new theory? Well, if you realize, the nymphs are accompanied by men, and these men, at least from the iconography that they're wearing, if you're looking at their heads, you may notice they have several headpieces, they look like gods. So perhaps the river gods are being accompanied by their nymphs, and that would explain also some of the further iconography. If you're looking at the bottom with this beautiful depiction of animals, by the way, which Rubens entirely copies from classical mosaics and frescoes, mostly from ancient Rome and Greece, we see how the crocodile is actually at the feet of the river god, which is looking backwards at us, and accompanied by a woman of color, which is supposed to represent Africa if this was a continent, but of course, if this is a river, it's going to be the Nile, and the crocodiles explain themselves. And the crocodile is facing off to that tiger, and that tiger can be no other than the tiger protecting the Ganges River, since this is a Bengal tiger. So we think that there is a slightly different iconography or understanding that has been put in here, but we cannot quite agree as to which one is right. So I'll be delighted to hear later on when we open questions, what do you think? Should this still be known as the four continents, or the four rivers, or the four nymphs? You know the problems that we have with, nomenclature in art history, but it's become a little bit controversial because of that. Now, there is another interesting, or at least a couple of other interesting elements that go into this painting, which is, of course, the fact that we have this black nude, or at least this woman is covered up until her torso, but the back end is entirely open. We know that Rubens actually painted two black women in the entirety of his career. And although the depiction of people of color starts becoming a bit more popular in Europe at this moment in time, it's still, complicated. However, from other sketches of Rubens, we know that he seems to be, to some extent, transfixed by trying to understand and trying to depict people of other cultures. Whether this is because he was a very well-traveled man as a diplomat or something else, we are not sure. There is another reading in here in relation specifically to the black woman in the middle, which suggests some kind of imperialist agenda. If we are to believe some of the theories, the lady that is standing higher up amongst everyone else would be understood to be the representation of Europe. And if that is the case, notice how Africa is actually at the bottom in comparison to Asia and America. Well, this could be a representation of what the Netherlands and Spain are going through at this moment in time, the imperialistic agenda and development of their empires, or it could be simply something else that for whatever reason, Rubens only identifies as a person of color or as a person worthy of being depicted of a different identity in terms of their ethnicity in the case of Africa, but not in the case of the Americas or Asia. This leaves us a little bit transfixed, and we don't really know, what else to say about this painting. But it's obviously he wanted to express some important ideas in here. Now, we believe that Rubens painted this at a very important time from a political perspective. It's the period that we call the 12-year truce following the 8-year war, where, well, there is going to be quite a lot of incidents in Europe at this moment in time. And we reckon that part of the iconography in here is essentially to push for peace and concord, because, well, as we're going to see in a moment, Rubens was a very important diplomat. He will have actually a very important role to fulfill once this truce is over. And some iconography that we see in here relating to cornucopias and generally healthy full bodies in a very fresh kind of landscape seems to suggest enjoy the peace, be part of that world rather than making war. So, whichever analysis of the painting you like best, this is what we think of the four continents so far. The other thing that is very clear in here is that we've gone a long way from that original Adam and Eve, and you can see bodies that are actually a lot more truthful and realistic to how the human body actually looks like. Well, let's move on to the next one, because this is a rather interesting painting for Rubens, and that probably means we're approaching the halfway point of the tour. So I'm just going to quickly drop into the chat the way in which you can keep on supporting us here in World Virtual Tours through the generosity of your donations via PayPal and Stripe, and of course my upcoming tours as well for the rest of the month. Well, this is a landscape, obviously. I'm sure you gathered that much. This is normally known as the landscape with characters or the stone carriers. It's one of those that it has a double name. This dates from 1616, and it is actually a very important piece because a lot of people aren't aware of this, but Rubens actually created over 30 landscapes in his career. The problem is, for whatever reason, they are not going to be as popular as his religious or mythical paintings. And the majority of these landscapes will sadly remain unsold by the time he dies. This was part of that collection. But what I think is amazing is the capability that Rubens has in what is, from a, I guess, a story perspective, a very simple painting to evoke so much. We have this fully fleshed landscape, which looks a little bit dangerous, a little bit complicated, and these two ordinary people trying to get their carts across it. Well, the great way in which Rubens directs the action by creating that dynamism with the cart and the trees and the jagged rocks, it immediately resonates with us. We all know that these people are struggling to make a living. This is pretty much just reflecting on the struggles of the countryside. And in a way, by where he locates those rocks and the trees on either side, he's controlling the subject and how we engage with it. He's telling us essentially how we need to look at this. It's not just an evocative bucolic scene. There is more to it. And it's important that you pay attention to what else he's presenting, of course. Now, we know that the carters here, the people carrying the carts, are actually based on life studies. So he's not necessarily using models or specific inspiration for this. And it's something similar for the, I say it, for the trees and the landscape. This is not an attempt to realism. Rubens is not trying to present to you a realistic painting of nature that you may know. He's trying to almost fathom it from his own imagination and bring it to life that way, which is peculiar because, as we will see in the next couple of weeks through Baroque, the more it advances, the more it pulls towards realism. But Rubens is not going to be part of that trend, at least not in what concerns nature, which is a very interesting aspect of him, given how many landscapes he actually painted, and that perhaps explains why those landscapes were not as successful and yet so beautiful and evocative as this sunset with the moon already coming through that he's presenting us here. Well, let's now talk about a very different kind of painting. This was a series of paintings I had to include in this talk. There have been many things I couldn't include, but I had to. This is the first of 5. I will be passing the slides in a moment, of the series that we know as the 5 Senses, which was produced between 1617 and 1618 in an amazing collaboration between two of the greatest Dutch masters of this moment in time. This is perhaps the best, the most iconic of the collaborations between Jan Bruegel the Elder and Rubens, which a lot of people forget. Collaboration was actually quite prominent in the Netherlands, even before these two, but they are going to push it to kind of a new level. The reason why collaboration was quite popular in the Netherlands at this moment in time is because we know that a lot of artists in the area tended to specialize. They were not all, a master of all trades. They may become, specialists in landscape or in portrait or on this and that. And then they work with other artists to create combined pieces, which help them both progress their careers. And that meant that the things that every individual did were at high level of quality. So this is the general scenario upon which the Netherlands are operating in. But Jan Bruegel and Rubens just take it to 11. The 5 senses that they present are in order: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. So we are starting with sight. I will pass them through as we go. In fact, I will change to hearing just now. And these are all allegorical explanations of the senses. I'm sure that you're noticing very rich backgrounds and then female figures accompanied by some kind of companion that are the ones that are enjoying the experience. And depending on the visual cues that we've been left on the landscape, that's how we know which one of those senses it is, right? The other thing that I'm sure you've noticed is that there is a myriad of objects in these paintings. They are Baroque, quite literally, in the sense of over the top with absolutely everything. Well, the collaboration is most likely a commission that was given to Bruegel, since he's the senior of the two artists, and that he asks Rubens to come in. So we think that Bruegel prepared the paintings, and then Rubens essentially inserted the figures, which is at the end of the day what he specialized in. So we see the best of both worlds in that regard. And the reason for this is because, well, their styles are similar, but they're different, of course. You know, Jan Bruegel had been already at this for quite some time when Rubens becomes important. He has the wisdom of age, the ability to see the full scope of paintings in terms of the series, at least. And the thing that he's very good at is creating that kind of story in some ways. The brush of Jan Bruegel is very meticulous. There is nothing ever, an inch out of place. And he is a great observer of the world. So he pushes in many ways for that realism, while Rubens is not like that at all. He's a very energetic painter. His brush is very vital in that sense. It's almost coming alive, full of emotions, and that you can see in these bodies, which are clearly living and experiencing the world that Jan Bruegel is blending together with the style of Rubens. But as you see, the joint between the two styles is perfect. If I didn't tell you these were two different artists working at this at the same time, you probably wouldn't know unless you have a very keen, trained eye. Is seamless. And there is a very good reason why these two men work very well together. Because for once in a lifetime, this is a story of not just collaboration, but beautiful friendship. And if anyone has the budget for the film, I want to see this. Jans and Peter, the best friends of art in the world, they were actually really close friends in real life. Rubens acted as sort of his translator and emissary to some clients in Italy for Jan Bruegel. We also know that they looked out for each other, for all kinds of opportunities outside of the court. In fact, Rubens is one of the he's the godfather of one of Jan Bruegel's kids, and when Jan Bruegel dies, Rubens becomes the executor of the will and guardian of his children. So in 25 years of knowing each other and being friends, they created 24 compositions like this, which are mind-blowing. But the five senses is very important because we are pretty sure that this commission was given to them directly by the governor of the Spanish Netherlands, by Archduke Albert VII of Austria and his wife Isabella. And the reason why we're pretty sure of that is you may have noticed, looking through the slides, that all of these regal backgrounds are indeed real places. They are actually based on the palaces and accommodations that the couple had. And you may also have noticed a lot of different art pieces all over it, because for Jan Bruegel and Rubens, it was not just important to represent themselves as artists, but the whole community of the Netherlands in this great commission to impress their patrons. So, the two best artists in Antwerp at the time creating this feast for the eyes, and in such a beautiful harmony due to this long-lasting friendship, is probably one of the most adorable things that we get from the world of art history, and I could not bring it through to you. And this last one is, of course, Touch, which, as you can see, is very much reflecting the very cold touch of war in many ways, as well as that of love. Well, Now that I have talked to my heart's content about this collaboration, because honestly, to me, is one of the most wonderful things created, I will do an interlude to explain why I've not been able to include these two massive bits of art into the PowerPoint. Rubens painted for an awful amount of time. He was painting, like I said, until 1640 when he dies, since 1598. That is 4 decades of art, pretty much. And during the period of the 1620s, which is where the two of the largest commissions that he receives, he's mostly working as an ambassador, envoy, and diplomat, although performing great historical paintings. Now, these two series, the Maria de Medici cycle and the Constantine, the history of Constantine I, are massive. You know, the Maria de Medici cycle is 24 paintings just on its own, and the tapestries for the history of Constantine are not as many, but there are still too many. We could have just a lecture on their own. And the problem is, in order to dissect these paintings, we need to go so deep into the history so you understand truly what's happening that I wouldn't be able to do them justice in just a few minutes. But I wanted to include them so you would know that during the 1620s is when we see a slight shift, and Rubens, because of his capacity as a diplomat as well, starts getting a lot of these large commissions that will really help both his position as in court as a businessman and diplomat and as an artist. And that sort of unfolds in the next proper painting that we're going to talk about, which is this, Peace and War, or you may also know it as Minerva protecting Pax. Well, this one we have, by the way, in the National Art Gallery here in the UK, in London. And this painting was done between 1629 and 1630. And it is a huge canvas. It's nearly 3 meters in size, 200 something centimeters. And it was essentially produced as an attempt to ease the peace negotiations between England and Spain following the war in the, well, not just in the Netherlands, but everywhere at this moment in time. Now, this is when Rubens is also working as the envoy for Philip IV. And this is also the moment in time when Rubens and Velazquez, who we will see in a couple of weeks' time, will become friends. So as you see, this man has the capability to bring people into his life and improve both his working and personal relations to every extreme. Well, in 1630, after producing the piece, Rubens presents this painting to the King of England, which at this moment in time is Charles I. And it's not just because Charles I is, of course, the intended party of the negotiation. Charles I is also, at this moment in time, one of the largest collectors of art in Europe. So again, we see how his patronage and political agendas are marrying together. And the painting and the topic of the painting is no surprise. Well, this is one of the many mythological paintings that Rubens will do. He really starts developing an inkling for historical and mythological paintings, since he borrows so much inspiration, of course, from the work of Renaissance artists such as Michelangelo and Raphael, but even from art that goes farther back in time, like Greco-Roman traditions. Well, in the canvas, what we see here is the following. In the middle, you see the woman in the nude holding her breast and a baby in the middle. This is supposed to be Pax. And Pax here, which is the goddess of peace, is represented by the goddess Ceres. And Ceres is actually an earth goddess in Greco-Roman tradition, which is why around her, as you see, we see a plenty cornucopia, lots of food everywhere, people having a good time and enjoying peace through that beautiful diagonal that cuts in very bright tones through the middle of the painting, and that brings that scene of joy to the forefront. In the back, and the reason why this is called Peace and War, we see an armed woman with a helmet and a shiny shield, which is, of course, the goddess Athena, or in this case, her Roman interpretation of Minerva, pushing away the god of war, Ares, or Mars. and his acolyte, the Fury of War, which is the person with the gaunt face that you see at the back. If you notice, even the colors at the back of the painting where the dramatic impact of war is happening are darker and gloomier. This is no coincidence. What Rubens is very clearly sending them as a message with this painting is that everyone should be wanting to rejoice in peace. There is no reason to not be friends and not reach a mutual agreement, if you see what I mean, because the horror of war affects us all. And that's something you can see perfectly in the back face of the Fury of Mars. So with this allegory and this mastery of diplomacy, very charming diplomacy, by the way, that Rubens is able to craft into his narrative, he becomes a vital player in the European politics of this moment in time. Because the thing is, people in high places can relate to Rubens. You know, a lot of artists don't necessarily have the mannerisms, the knowledge, the ability to engage with, well, essentially rich people. But Rubens has learned, and Rubens has created for himself a certain degree of wealth that elevates his status. So he can play that game. And with his art, which is always well representing whatever he wants to put forward in an appropriate way, it's very difficult to say no to this man. Well, now we're going to see perhaps one of his most iconic paintings of them all, which is the Three Graces at el Museo del Prado. And I had to include this painting because, of course, I grew up with the Three Graces. It was one of the very first images of Rubens that I saw. And I always will never forget what my mom used to say about Rubens, which is what I think a lot of people see in here. This man can only paint beautiful, chubby, full women, which is, I think, what many people expect Rubens to be doing with his art. And that is, to some degree, the truth. The man seems to be obsessed with the female body and female beauty, both idealized and in a much more realistic way. This painting has received huge, accolades because the texture of the skin that we've seen here, the muscles, the fact that it even represents very honestly a body that is not necessarily what we may see nowadays on TV, on supermodels, but that for the standards of Baroque society was very much on point. It's not necessarily, I don't think we can necessarily say a true feminist portrayal, but we're definitely dealing with a man who appreciates women and the women body in a way that he's not afraid to express himself and to express himself fully. Now, we think part of this appreciation comes from the fact that Rubens marries again. After the very sudden death of Isabella, he's going to have a second marriage to Elena Forment. And as you see, the age difference now, it's even larger. And this would have actually potentially raised some eyebrows because the man was 53 and the woman was 16. Now, this painting, we don't have an exact date for it, but we reckon it was done once again shortly after the marriage ceremony. And a lot of art historians, myself included, have not been able to help but notice that the Three Graces seem to be indeed two different entities, two graces welcoming in a third one. As you can see, there's the two of them, the ones that are darker in hair, that are on the right-hand side of the scene, almost welcoming or bringing in this blonde hair beauty, which looks suspiciously a lot like Helena in here. We know that Rubens was obsessed with his second wife. I mean, if the man already had, big things to say about his former wife, his second wife just seems to, in many ways, reinvigorate him and drive him into a very happy, joyful moment in his life. And he paints her quite literally to death. He will create many portraits, and we will see a lot of women in other paintings, not just the Three Graces, that actually have her features. Well, in many ways, this is, I guess, Rubens creating his own idea of Venus, right? Again, linking in with that mythology. And we know that Rubens was very fond of doing this. He didn't just like mythology, he wanted mythology to be relevant for the present time where he was living. And in this case, well, I suspect, of course, for himself. Now, what is very interesting in here, and something that if you know some linguistics, you may notice, is that the three graces, the gratias, as we know them in Latin, are not just the graces in terms of, good virtues, but the three graces are also a sign of reciprocity, which is where in Spanish we get the word gracias from, which we used to refer to graces, but also to say thanks. So there are some theories that suggest the three graces are not just here to represent the beautiful embodiment of female sensuality, but in a way, Rubens saying thanks to the universe for the gift that is his second wife. So, on behalf of Rubens and all Spanish people who have seen this painting growing up, you're welcome. In fact, this painting is going to be very important because alongside with a few of the others that he, created for the Habsburg court, they will be part of the first collection of proper paintings that the Museo del Prado will open up to the public on behalf of Spain in the 19th century. So it's very precious for Rubens in more than one way and for everyone else. And interestingly, we know that this must have been a personal project because he still had it in his workshop when he died, and there is no sketch for it. And why is this thing about the sketch important? Normally, when artists are preparing for a large project of any kind, there is an understudy, there is a cartoon, there is a sketch where they are practicing or making ideas about what they're going to put on the canvas or whatever medium they're using. The fact that he doesn't do it in this case makes us believe that he had no intention of sharing this painting probably with anyone other than just himself, or that he was just happy with whatever the result of his freedom and embrace of the female beauty led him to. So, a very personal painting for Rubens. Right, we are reaching almost the end of the talk, so let me pull in the chat one more time the links to the upcoming tours, which includes everything that has to do with the Academy, as well as the new Academy that we start in a couple of days with the history of England, and the links to the way you can keep on supporting us here in World Virtual Tours through the donations via PayPal and Stripe. And this is a very interesting and important painting for Rubens. This is the painting that he's actually buried with in the Church of St. James in Antwerp. Now, he had actually painted the thing beforehand. This dates from, well, we reckon 1635 to 38. A more recent analysis suggests it was probably closer to 38 to 39, but give or take. Now, we know that the last few years of Rubens' life are actually quite hard on him because he becomes really ill with gout. And there have been a lot of people who have been really surprised by this because Rubens is actually asthenius. He carries an asthenian lifestyle. But, the diet and overall health ideology of the time means that we see gout being a serious problem for people who can afford eating meat quite regularly at this moment in time. And yet, the gout is really not going to be an issue until after he has finished this painting. It will literally really become a serious problem on the spring of 1640. He will lose touch and ability to do anything with both his hands. They were completely paralyzed. This really prompts him to write his will finally on the 27th of May, and 3 days later, he's dead. So, in these circumstances, there had been some discussions about, what was going to be done with his body, etc. He's actually buried in the chapel of his wife's family. And it seems that he had given the authority or suggested that if his time came and the painting was still with him, the Virgin and the Child with saints, he should be buried with the painting. So it's very rare that an artist can choose the way that, their altarpiece is going to look like, because that's essentially what the role of this painting fulfills, or that even have a hand from an artistic perspective in how they will be remembered after death. So it's very iconic and very rare because of this peculiarity. And what the painting represents is a virgin with a child and saints in a very epic and no less dramatic display of the tenets of the Counter-Reformation. Like I mentioned, he's gonna be raised a Catholic once they come back to Antwerp. His relationship to the King of Spain, to the Archduke of the Spanish Netherlands, the ability to carry the message of religion that this man is going to carry through his art is going to be so important. He needs to set the standard. The Counter-Reformation is going to have to be very aggressive to try and make up for the diversity of Reformation that is happening in Europe. So what this painting attempts to do is to highlight important aspects of the Christian message. We have St. George very epically holding the banner, the champion of Christianity, right? The killer of the dragon. Then we have a very penitent and very devout Mary Magdalene, as most women of any disposition ought to be. And in front of us, we also see St. Jeremy in here, who, as you see, is holding a Bible on his knees and he's pointing up to the sky, kind of trying to, I guess, exemplify where the knowledge is coming from. This is the word of God. I'm just a messenger, just like anyone else. And of course, at the center of this, something that is crucial in Spanish art and in general in the art of the Counter-Reformation, which is the adoration of the child with the Virgin. Marian tradition is going to be crucial in Catholic society moving forward. And in fact, even within the Reformation, Marian tradition is one of the very few things that certain branches of the Reformist Church and Catholicism have in common. So it's a pull for everybody. And it's a way of bringing the message of the ideas of Jesus, God, and the Bible to everyone's hearts, because everybody would know what this means. Adore the child and the Holy Mother. Be brave like St. George. Fight for those Christian ideals that come from above. And if you do wrong, repent and be devout like Mary Magdalene, and salvation will be yours. And that is, well, pretty much all I can say about Rubens in just an hour. I could say a lot more, but it will take us a lot more than just 1 hour. So I'm just gonna open the chat just now so you can ask any questions that you may have. Please fire away. And for those of you who may be looking for a list of books, since I normally put it, the list of books is gonna come on the 4th session, because I'll do a general list for all of the sessions. And yeah, chat is open now, so I'm just gonna grab a quick drink. Feel free to ask anything that you may want, and I shall be there just reading you in a second. Right, okay. No, I needed that. Oh, thank you so much, Betty. I'm glad that you found it informative. Like I said, this was entirely the point of this lecture, is that so many people had asked for Rubens. So I had to. I couldn't do Baroque Masters without coming through to Rubens. And in general, he's such an important artist. I'm glad that you have enjoyed it. Pat, in the last painting, why is Mary Magdalene seen as bare breast? Is that necessary? Well, it is quite often in iconography of this time period that Mary Magdalene is bare-breasted. First of all, to differentiate her from the Virgin Mary, and second of all, because the bare breast carries certain iconographies. It carries the fact that she's a bountiful woman, which is trying to allude to her past as a prostitute. We often see in a Catholic tradition bearing one chest and sort of hitting one's chest as a sign of repent. So having her chest exposed is another sign of that. So it is part of the acknowledged iconography that we see for her at this moment in time. But of course, we also need to add in the caveat that at the end of the day, this is Rubens. And even though it is a religious painting, the man likes painting flesh. So it's a mix of both. Bandit Queen, he did come indeed to England. He was here for a short while, acting as that envoy, and he did a few pieces of art for a few local nobles and in a few manor houses. But the majority of the activity he does in England will be mostly as a diplomat. However, it is because he comes here that we have some wonderful pieces of him at the National Gallery and in a few other museums in the country, indeed. No worries. Thank you so much, Mary. It's very kind. And well, I'm glad it is new appreciation. You know, like I said, the biggest struggle trying to represent Rubens in any way, shape, or form is he paints so much. I spent 2 days choosing what I was going to be putting in here because there is almost a Rubens for every single person, if you see what I mean. So I wanted to give you as much variety as possible, even if that meant going into some not so well-known, you know, pieces of art. And yes, remember that the academies are all recorded, so you can access them through YouTube and to the World Virtual Tours Academy website. In fact, I'll put the link in the chat now. You can find it in there on my, next virtual tours, etc. And it will be available, but only for a few days. So, don't leave it too long, essentially, because, well, it may not be there the next time. Oh my, Longina, thank you so much. It's very kind. Thank you, Steve. You guys are very, very kind. Thank you, Erin. It's lovely to see that you've enjoyed so much. And I always love, well, indeed, Ronnie, right? And that's it. I mean, if there was anybody feeling self-conscious at all in here today, don't. I think you can tell that Rubens thought all bodies were beautiful. And I think it's very important that we can see messages like that through history. This man was not shaming anybody, no woman at all, regardless of her curves, of the look of her flesh. He was happily embracing it all and accepting that bodies are just that and they all can be beautiful. And I think the fact that a man was doing that in the 17th century while being a very powerful promoter of religion says a lot about the way he saw the world. Isn't there a fountain in yes, exactly, Ken. So this is why we think that there may be that Christian connection, or at least connection to antiquity in there. Pamela, in the second version of the Madonna, the darker section, yes, it is indeed very sort of realistic in that regards, right? I was surprised that there was no dove in the lighter version. Well, we think it is because at that moment in time, if you recall, the focus is very much on St. Gregory, which seems to be the main carrier of the scene. The adoration is there, but there needs to be somebody to adore, if you see what I mean. And we reckon that perhaps at that moment in time, he puts a lot of emphasis in St. Gregory and some of those other details, which make for a much more, understood Madonna, are kind of missed. So although I love the first version, I actually think the second one does better justice to what the theme of the Madonna really should be, precisely because of little bits and bobs like that. Right. I have a couple of minutes more to answer some more questions. So let me just put in the chat one more time the links to the donations and the upcoming tours. And let me see what else I can answer before we wrap this up. I think his ladies are what I once heard, ripe and fecund, 100%. There are proper full bodies that are exuding life and movement in every single way. So I'm very glad that you guys are appreciating them. I see Kate, his bottoms are wonderful. I'm very glad that this has been, entirely taken on board. My love of classical painting was born. Oh my God, Erin, this is so kind. Thank you. It's a good thing that Charles, well, yes, for for all the not so good things that Charles I contributed to the UK, his art collection, was really worthwhile. So we're lucky that he indeed engaged that way. I was in Glasgow. Oh yes, I'm so glad. I was gonna mention that actually Rubens is actually one of those artists that, because he produced so much, every so often you would see he comes up in the news because we have found a new painting or whatever. And this one by the Duke of Buckingham, I was very, very close to include, but because it's a relatively recent development, we don't actually have a lot of analysis on the subject. We're trying to still investigate it, but it is a wonderful portrait of a gentleman, very clearly, highlighting all of these features that I think it's so apparent in the aristocratic background of the time, for sure. In War and Peace, the figure at the front has hooves. Is that a devil? It's actually a satyr. We see this a lot. For Rubens, if a scene is mythological, it has to have nymphs and it has to have satyrs of some kind. And we think this is a very classical way of engaging with pagan iconography. We see this often in the way that the Renaissance artists represent, this kind of ancient classical world. It's a very easy way of portraying a humanoid figure without making them human entirely. And well, in many ways, of course, from the point of view of the Christian ideology, consider that many of those hoofed figures did have that connotation of potentially being related to the devil. So it's not necessarily he's saying those figures are evil, but they are definitely not Christian. And the easiest way of portraying something as not Christian is by making them, as animal and in certain connotations different from what a good Christian should be as possible. So he plays a lot with this language, often in a way that is almost comical, because Rubens has a subtle but very clever sense of humor. I don't know if you may have noticed, even in the landscape with the Carters, it looks like they're just gonna, it almost looks like that moment when you're about to fall on the street and your friend who's very funny takes a picture and you are literally in peril. There are little glimpses to that. And that's also what makes Rubens' art so beautiful. It's incredibly serious, and yet there are comical moments of don't take yourself so seriously, because, well, life at the end of the day is short, and he would have been very aware of that, particularly with the death of his first wife. So that is pretty much all we have time for today, guys. By the way, I'm very sorry. I know I've not been able to answer every single question, but you're always welcome to email us after the talk. And like with all of the Academy, remember that we are back next week with Bernini, who, by the way, disclaimer, is not my favorite artist, but I cannot talk about Baroque Masters and completely eclipse Bernini. So this is my test to myself to deliver to you proper art history, even from people I don't particularly like. So on that note, I will say good night for right now. See you later on this week if you are joining us on the English History Academy. And otherwise, I'll see you next week back again at the same time. Take care, guys. Thank you so much for all of your lovely messages.